where we're talking to a parenting coordinator. Picture this. You have 2 children, aged 8 and 10. You separated from your ex-partner 2 years ago now. Your eldest has a few behavioural issues that you're trying to work through, and it's pretty safe to say that the day-to-day household activities in your house are pretty draining. It's a big ask. Your ex and yourself cannot communicate at all. You don't talk to each other. There's no way you'd meet for a cup of coffee and have a chat. You've been to mediation twice now in the past 2 years since you separated. The first one was pretty hectic. Relationships Australia put you in separate rooms. They called it a shuttle conference. You didn't even know what that was at the time. But because of your high conflict, they decided to have you in separate rooms. First mediation, bit of a disaster. No agreement reached. Second mediation, you came up with a parenting plan, thank goodness. You both signed it and off you went on your merry way to co-parent. The thing is though, all that conflict didn't magically disappear, did it, once you had that signed agreement? You still can't work things through. Now, you're coming up with issue after issue. You did have a lawyer back in the day. You were smart enough to go and see a lawyer to get some legal advice during that mediation process. But you know that going back to them now is going to cost a, ton of money. It's going to be $500 an hour, and your lawyer's going to be writing to your ex, back and forth letters. It's just not going to get you anywhere. You always end up disagreeing. Every time you get a message from your ex, you just feel anxious. You just feel ick. So what are you going to do? Doesn't matter what parenting courses you do. Doesn't matter what parenting courses your ex does. You just can't communicate. So here we are. We're talking to a PC today, a parenting coordinator. Maybe they have the answers. I don't know. Let's bring in our parenting coordinator guest speaker today, Clare Jobson. Now, bear with me as I do this technology. There we go, Clare. Thanks for joining us today, Clare Jobson.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here, talking all things PC, one of my favourite topics ever. So
it is, and so we've got the right person joining us today to talk about it. That is for sure, and also the right person in this conversation series, because to let you know, Clare, I don't know that much about PCs, parenting coordinators, so pretty safe to say I'm going to learn a few things today as well. Let me introduce all you guys to Clare. So Clare sent through her bio to me. Clare's in Brisbane. She's a Brisbane-based lawyer. She's originally from Adelaide. She's worked here, there and everywhere, all around Australia. She's a defence spouse. Now, Clare has a nursing background, which gives her some real special and unique skills, I think. And she formed her firm, CJ Legal, back in 2015. When I asked Clare for her bio, she said, I'm passionate about kindness and meeting humans where we find them. And she's also a co-author of a book, Life with Purpose. And her chapter is called From Grief to Growth, Empathy, My Superpower and My Curse, which I think that's awesome. So welcome, Clare.
Hi, Shaya. Thanks for having me. Yes, when you rattle all those things off, it makes me think of that Liam Neeson quote from Taken. I have a very particular set of skills that I've acquired over a very long career. So it's a blending and meshing of many things. And so I wear many hats. I'm a family lawyer. I'm a mediator, AMDRES accredited mediator, parenting coordinator, and I'm collaboratively trained in both family and wills and estates. So I wear lots of hats, but I don't wear them both at the same time. So I think that's probably one of the important things to say about parenting coordination is it's a very distinct and separate role. So it's the same as the family lawyer for dad can't act for mum. The ICL in the matter can't be their FDRP. All those hats, somebody might have all those hats on their, the Fisk hat stand that they talk about, but they wear all those hats at the same time.
Yes. So today, they'll put on your PC hat today.
Today I've got
that you bring in all those other skills.
Yeah, so all the other stuff is floating around in there, and I draw on all sorts of bits and bobs when I'm dealing with different things. But you know, when I'm doing parenting coordination work, I have to be very strict of staying in that lane. And so parenting coordination is another form of dispute resolution. It is very different to an FDRP, and it's very different to a mediator. It's different to arbitrators, because we don't actually have parenting arbitration in our Australian legislation.
And what I'll do, Claire, if it's all right with you, I've got a whole heap of kind of specific questions to ask you soon. And what I want to let those who are live know is that if you guys have questions, just put it in the question section. And if Claire and I don't cover it in the question time, I'll make sure we loop back to that. But also
Oh, sorry, I was going to say it would be also great if people let us know where they're tuning in from. So it'd be good to know where they're from, and whether they're practitioners or parents or FDRPs.
Yeah, and we did have a poll actually, Claire, just so you know that I can see at the moment we've got 50% parents and 50% lawyers. I do know a lot of FDRPs sorry for those parents who don't know the lingo, mediators. We did have a lot of mediators register as well, so I suspect they'll watch back. But in terms of live, people are now answering the polls, and parents, there's more parents than lawyers, which is an interesting combination. But in terms of what we'll do today, and keep answering those polls, guys, I'm going to run through in a moment some really quick slides, and it will only take a couple of minutes just to summarise for everybody how parenting arrangements can be reached. And then we'll go into Q&A with Claire. In terms of handouts, we've got a few handouts that will drop at about the 30-minute mark, so look out for them to download. There'll be a copy of the slides. There'll be a paper from Anne-Marie Cade, who's a practitioner, and her 2020 study on PC's jurisdictional comparison. So she went off and did a deep dive into different countries around how they work as PCs in those countries. And then I think this is going to be of particular interest to the lawyers and the mediators. Claire's kindly shared her draft orders and her draft wording for parenting plans that got the green light from the court, and they'll drop as well at about the half-hour mark, so if you download them at that time. So I'm going to quickly run through the slides now, then we'll ditch the slides and I'll let Claire do all the talking. So let me bring in the slides now. All right. So this is what we're going to cover today. What exactly is a parenting coordinator? Why you might use them? How they might assist during the mediation process? How they might be used in court? And then Claire's just going to talk about all the practical things, you know, costs and logistics and so on. So by way of context, the types of ways you can formalise your parenting arrangements, there's three ways really. A parenting plan that can be done between parents. You don't need anyone else assisting you. You can draw them up yourself and sign them. You might use a mediation service to reach a parenting plan. You can do consent minutes of order, which are lodged with the court, so it's a bit more of a formal drafting of the agreement. It's registered with the court, but there's no court proceedings, and a registrar of the court looks over them, gives them the court stamp, and they become legally binding. Or you might be in court and you've had court orders made. So a parenting plan, it's written, signed and dated, and it sets out the arrangements for the children. So they might cover things like communication, how you guys are going to talk to each other, school health issues, travel, when you can travel, handover or where changeover is going to take place, and pretty importantly, what you're going to do if there's no agreement. So there's the summary of the consent minutes of order. They're legally binding if they're registered with the court. And in terms of court orders, you can have interim orders during the court proceedings or final orders that are made at the very end that might be by consent, by agreement, or if you go to trial. Not many matters go to trial, but if they do, that's the final order. that the judge might make. And it's the expectation of the court, as you can see on this slide, that everyone complies with the orders. They can be modified later on if you have a subsequent court order or a parenting plan that you both agree on. So that's my very brief summary of the ways that you can, there's the recap there, that you can formalise parenting arrangements. So what we're going to talk about today is how you might use someone like Clare in those different processes. Sorry, I'm going to ditch the slides now, Clare, and I'll bring you back in. And let's get going with a chat. I hope you got your cup of coffee there.
I've got some water here. I've already had my caffeine this morning, so all good. Good.
I'm going to start with the most obvious question. Well, I think it is. What is a parenting coordinator?
So, parenting coordination has been around in sort of North America, Canada since the late 90s. Relatively new in the Australian jurisdiction, and when I say relatively new, probably around the 2017-ish mark. Mm-hmm. The guidelines that we have adopted here in Australia that's been used for training parenting coordination here, of course, is based on that American model. So some of the legislative things are different to our legislation. So sort of when we adopt those things, we've got to make sure that it fits with how we do things. So the American context, parenting coordinators are very much arbitrators. We don't have parenting arbitration in Australia. So the difference is we provide a scaffold to families who have a plan, interim orders or final orders in place of how to live with and work with the orders that have been agreed or imposed on them. So I say agreed or imposed because you can agree by consent to appoint a parenting coordinator to assist you live with your parenting arrangements, or the court can make an order directing you to attend upon a parenting coordinator to assist you to live with those orders. The difference between a parenting coordinator and a mediation is a mediator will see people, help them facilitate developing those arrangements, and there might be a review point for things to be put in place, but you're pretty much left to your own devices. The same as if a court makes an order on a final basis, this will happen, see you later. Years of not agreeing and conflict and things like that don't fall away once that sealed order is in front of the parents.
It's not that magic wand, is it?
It's not a magic wand.
We look like witches doing that. It's just not. I mean, it's a piece. I mean, it's binding, but it's not necessarily the answers that parents need, is it?
That's right. And I mean, often parents have been so conflicted with each other for such a long time, they actually lose insight into how that's affecting their children, because they get, we're humans, we're emotional creatures, we get sucked down the drain of all those negative emotions, anger, upset. It also messes with your clarity about decision making. So parenting coordination is very much a dispute resolution process. The difference between parenting coordination and mediation is that it is not a confidential process, because parents are agreeing to engage in a process where they're being held accountable for those child-focused, child-informed decisions.
And I was going to get to that confidentiality a bit later, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's all right. Sorry, I'm probably
no.
Pull me up, because I can talk about this for hours. So I can rein it.
That's it's just so it's very interesting to me, because full disclaimer, Claire, I mean, I've been working as a lawyer, as you have, for a long time, perhaps too long. But I've never had a client where I've actually used a PC. So I'm just being completely transparent with you. This is very new to me as well. It's very interesting. Who who can qualify to? What sort of training do you have to be a PC?
So currently, to be a parenting coordinator, you either have to be a family lawyer or a FDRP. So for the non legal people in the room, FDRP is a family dispute resolution practitioner, and they're a particular type of mediator who can issue those 60I certificates that people require to be able to commence parenting proceedings if there's no agreement or if it's not appropriate and those sorts of things. Psychologists, family report writers. At the moment, the scope of parenting coordinators in Australia is fairly broad. I think you mentioned in the intro bit that I've provided you with some example parenting coordination orders. That's actually come from a working group that I've been involved in for a couple of years now through Pacifica Congress, which is to be the Australian chapter of the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, which is that American body. So Pacifica was the former Australian chapter of that. And a couple of years back, a working group was put together to look at the American guidelines and example orders that are being used around the place and adopt them and adapt them so that they are more appropriate for our Australian jurisdiction and the legislation that applies to our children here.
So there'd be quite a lot bit of difference in jurisdictions, wouldn't there?
Yeah, there is, and you've got to remember, America, it's got 50 states, and their family law is state-based, so there's such a scattergun of different things happening there. And of course, they, some of those states have arbitration for parenting matters, and some don't. A lot of the comparison about the, and I won't go off on a tangent. Anne-Marie's Churchill Fellowship paper that we're including in what people are going to receive actually compares the differences between some of those jurisdictions.
And I can see that's dropped now for those who want to download that.
Brilliant.
Yep. Yeah. Good timing, Claire.
We couldn't have timed that better if we tried. There we go. There are huge differences. So, for example, Australia, we tend to appoint parenting coordinators for a period of 12 to 24 months. That sounds like a lot, but when you've got orders that people have got to live with, it actually takes a lot of time to unpack that historical polarized conflict and assist parents to become child-focused together. So, parents can be child-focused when the kids are in their care and the other parent isn't around. But they, the human in us, emotions, we lose our ability to bury that when the other parent's around. Yeah, especially if they've had years of going through court and all those things. It is very, very hard to get back on the same page. And 12 to 24 months sounds like a lot, but South Africa, they actually appoint parenting coordinators until a child becomes an adult. So that's a huge
my goodness. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And in South Africa, is it commonplace that a PC would be appointed, or just in those high conflict type matters?
My understanding is if orders are made in South Africa, they are until a child becomes an adult. So, yeah, so very, very, very different to what America and Canada does, very different to what we do. And I'm sure there's logic behind that applies with their legislation, but I'm not a South African expert, so I can't speak about that. I have seen a couple of the parenting coordinators from South Africa present at a conference, and I know that they also did some training as part of a pilot scheme for Relationships Australia, Western Australia. Anne-Marie also talks about that pilot in her paper. And that pilot was actually quite successful, but the
It was
funding...
2018, wasn't it, initially?
2018, yeah.
Yeah.
The government funding beyond that pilot was not available. So with all things Commonwealth Attorney Generals, different priorities at different times.
That's a very nice way to put it.
Oh, that's me trying to be as diplomatic as possible.
So back to your qualifications, Claire, to be a coordinator. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned psychologists, mediators, FDRPs, and lawyers.
Family lawyers.
Yeah. So do you have to have a minimum number of years experience to be able, and do you need to do any specific training to actually be allowed to do this work?
Yes. So everybody, to become a parenting coordinator in Australia, you must do parenting coordination training. There are currently three trainers that I am aware of. So John Graham and Laurie Yasnek. John's based in Sydney and Laurie's based in Canada. They do training through their, what's the name of their? IFC, I think it is. I can give you the training providers. So basically, John and Laurie do training. The second one is Parenting Coordination Australia. That's done by Cassandra Pullis and Dr. Anne Purcell. So Cassandra's a family lawyer and FDRP, and Anne Purcell's a psychologist and FDRP. And the third lot of training is actually done via Pacifica Congress.
Yes, I saw that.
So the trainers there are at presently, they had been the South African people, but it's now Amanda Graham, who's a family lawyer, and I believe she's also an adjunct lecturer at one of the universities, and Lilia, and I'm not going to try and pronounce her last name because I don't want to get it wrong, but she's one of the report writers with the court.
Okay, so they're all very experienced people.
Yes.
And so you do that training, you become then qualified, and once you've got that, I guess, tick of approval, you're then able to practice as a PC. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. I think it would be really interesting, particularly, well, for hopefully everybody who's tuned in, what exactly do you do in terms of helping parents to reach agreements? And can you give us some examples of the type of, things or decisions that you can jump in and help parents with?
So to give you an example of process probably is the way to kick that off. PC is very much like other dispute resolution in that I do an intake with each parent. So I do a screen the same as I would if I was wearing a different hat as an FDRP or a mediator, in that I'm screening for background, any issues of domestic violence, substance abuse, those sorts of things that are usually done in any intake to do with mediation. I chat a lot with both parents about the children involved, ages and stages, where they're at, any special needs, any extended people involved with the children. So if the kids are perhaps neurodivergent and see psychologists and other people, who's on the kids' team. Very much screening parents, finding out where they're at, what the problems are, preparing them for the joint sessions with me, going through the ground rules about respectful communication and how those meetings will run. And I also, as part of that intake process, look at any of the orders that are in place, where they're at, whether or not the court has given permission to release things like family reports and those sorts of things, so those extra documents, to know what's going on for the children involved with this family. So difference between mediation where you are neutral and facilitative. I'm not neutral because I'm encouraging parents to be child focused. So I see my role as a parenting coordinator is assisting and scaffolding the family in what is in their kids' best interest, how they can live with their orders, how they can reduce the stress and effect of their conflict on their child.
And so parents would then come to you, for example, with a specific problem and say, we just can't reach an agreement about whether little Johnny does sporting on Wednesday or Thursday nights because it's cutting into our time. Is that an example of the sort of questions you get? Or?
You would know from some orders that some are very prescriptive and people get bogged down by how prescriptive they are, and if we're a minute late the wheels fall off the bus and all these sorts of things. And then you get the orders that are sufficiently vague and are subject to
we love those orders.
Yes, ways of interpretation that often end up in, contravention or relitigation, and we're back on the toxic roundabout and not being child focused. So, other than helping people work through their orders and work through issues that they each have, so it is that dispute resolution process where each party is actually given an opportunity to provide their version of things. I provide them with guidance to work through that. If they are unable to reach agreement between them, I can make non-binding recommendations. And I say non-binding because I am not an arbitrator.
Yes.
So I don't have a quasi-judicial role. I don't wear the judge's hat. I can view what's going on and say, look, based on this and this, it is my recommendation to you that you do X, Y, and Z, depending on what that issue is.
So even if there's a final order that has Clare Jobson as the parenting coordinator specified it in order, and then the parties are at a bit of a loggerheads, so you can give them feedback and recommendations, but you can't make a decision.
I can't alter their orders, and I can't make a judicial determination about their issues, but I can make those non-binding recommendations.
Can you give legal advice, Clare?
No, because I'm not wearing a lawyer hat.
Is that difficult for you? Because you're so knowledgeable in terms of you're a legal practitioner. Do you find that difficult to take that hat off?
I would probably give people thought bubbles. So I would say, I can't give you legal advice. However, if you went to your lawyer, they may say blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
If you need to get legal advice about this issue, I suggest you go back to your lawyer and have a chat about the legal advice that is specific to that particular issue. But I do give them, I like to call them thought bubbles. So I will give them a bit of an idea of what that's going to look like. But I do not give legal advice, no.
Yes. Do you recommend other services or courses throughout your role? So do you
Absolutely.
Can you talk us through that?
Absolutely. So my role also incorporates that ongoing education and support and guidance and coordination. So you have a neurodivergent child, you have issues with school, issues with the child. I'm able to facilitate both those parents who can't talk to each other in dealing with the issues and bringing that back to what is in the kid's best interest and is child focused.
And how well received is that usually with parents that you work with?
Look, you parenting coordination really is a process that sorts out those that are truly invested in what's in their kids' best interest from those who are not.
Yes.
And I say that from a place of respect, that if parents have the right support and guidance and structure, working towards what's in their kids' best interest, and they're there for the right reasons, parenting coordination is a wonderful thing.
I think that leads really well. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped in there, Claire.
No, that's okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We just had a question in the live chat from Stacey, and I think that kind of, again, marries in very well to what we were just talking about. Stacey asks, can one party still engage with a PC if the other party refuses to? And I think that goes to what you were just saying about wanting to engage.
Yeah, so if it's court ordered and the other party refuses to engage, it's the same as any other court order that a party refuses to engage with. It becomes an issue that the parent who's so it's whether or not it is a reasonable thing to relitigate about. Just because a parent's not engaged with the order about parenting coordination, has the rest of the wheels fallen off the bus?
Have you ever had a... I'm sorry, there's a, you know what, Claire, there's a lag in the Wi-Fi, so I'm not meaning to talk over you.
That's okay, and I've noticed that myself, that I jump in. Yeah.
Technology is wonderful when it works. Have you ever noticed or had the experience of one parent just refusing to engage with your services, even though it's court ordered? Yeah. How did that go?
Yeah, so I can say I had a matter, it was court ordered. It was court ordered by consent. So it wasn't imposed upon them. Both parties had agreed to engage me as their parenting coordinator. I sent off my usual introductory letter congratulating them on making those orders and wanting to set up my intake appointments. One parent engaged, and I did the intake with that parent. And after probably 3 or 4 attempts at trying to get the other party to engage, it's the same as if you're trying to get someone to engage in mediation. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. So I just had to provide correspondence to both of them that I was unable to assist because the other parent did not engage pursuant to the orders. So then it goes back to the parents as to what they want to do about that.
Which is a bit odd when they were orders made by consent, by agreement, isn't it? Yeah. Were they relatively recent orders, a recent agreement?
It was probably a couple of years back now, that one. I've my PC matters since, I've not had people not engage. I have had matters where I've had to withdraw from acting because there was difficulties, and it became apparent that one parent was more interested in litigation than child-focused arrangements. So, yes.
And so going back, I guess, to sort of real life intervention, I guess, or assistance that you provide, is one of the things you do you monitor the written correspondence between parties? Is that one thing that you do as part of your role as a PC?
Probably the number one thing that I implement is actually screening that communication, and I will provide parents with individual feedback on the tone and content of their communication, and that actually takes a lot of work. That takes a lot of work. That is not, again, it's not a magic wand moment where I just say, right, you're going to do this, this, and this, and it's fixed. That can take months to actually get parents to a stage where they are communicating with each other in a polite, respectful, and civil way. Again, it goes back to that human-centered, something happens, emotions flare, and, you've got keyboard warriors that shoot off this fiery, horrible thing. If they've got to include me in the communication, they actually have to sit back and think about what they're saying before they do it. So it does,
Yes.
it does reduce it. It doesn't go away straight away. It does take time. The other thing that I do fairly early onset when I'm working with parents, because it's often not ever covered in well-written or vague parenting orders, is I talk about black swan events.
Can you tell us more about that?
So black swan events are where, thinking of a recent situation up here in Brisbane,
yes.
we've had Cyclone Alfred, right? So
yes, absolutely.
The wheels fall off the bus, people are without power, without telephone communication. That would have created all sorts of havoc for parenting arrangements, flooded roads.
Yes.
What do we do? What do we do? How do we communicate? What do we do in black swan events? One parent's in hospital, one parent's been in a car accident. What do we agree is how we do this? And it may be, and I know it's probably something that you wanted to get into detail about down the track, but it may be that we need to have some more often than the usual PC meeting catch-ups to deal with those issues. So it might be that somebody's grandparent has passed away and they need to chat to me about working out the logistics of how the children can be included in the grandparents' funeral arrangements, because that falls on parent A's day instead of parent B's day. And how do we fix that, because it's not provided for in your orders? And how would you feel as a parent if you had deprived your child of their right to say goodbye to their grandparent?
Yes. And those things, of course, are not dealt with in parenting plans or court orders, are they?
Never.
I mean, nobody knew Cyclone Alfred. Well, we did know Cyclone Alfred was coming. There was a lot of anticipation around that. But, deaths of family members and other events that you've got no idea may happen. So you call them black swan events. I like that.
I do, because and black swan events affect all of us, our own family members, our own selves, no day is ever perfectly promised and no day is ever perfectly scheduled, but there always has to be an agreed plan of how we deal with these things. And sometimes those black swan conversations take more than just that initial chat that I have with people at intake and the first joint session. That can take a couple of meetings to actually get people thinking about that. I also get parents to do some very reflective things. So you've got an 8 and a 10-year-old child, I think, in your example, when you sort of started the webinar today. I'll say to the parents, so what do you remember about what it was like for you when you were 8 and 10? And how do you think, so we could be talking about whatever situation happened, how do you think your 8-year-old is feeling about that right now? How do you think your 10-year-old's feeling about that right now? And it's helpful because, again, those who are truly invested in what's in their kids' best interests, if you use some of those challenges to kind of flip the perspective, it helps them to return to being child-focused. If you have a parent that is not child-focused, they won't care about what the 8 or 10-year-old feels or thinks about that particular thing, because their focus is on aggravating the other parent. That becomes very apparent. So, and I think it may also be one of your future topics that we're going to chat about. PC is not confidential. It is a reportable dispute resolution process.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that now. So it's quite different to mediation, isn't it? When you go off to mediation for a family law matter, whatever is said generally is confidential unless you get assigned parenting plan. But PC work It's quite different, isn't it?
It is quite different, and that's deliberate. And it goes back to parents being accountable and child-focused. So a family dispute resolution practitioner, they have confidentiality as a mediator, but they also have the protections of sections 10H and 10J. So it's confidential and it's inadmissible. But it is also a point in time for those families. It's not an ongoing support. It is let's put together your agreement, let's facilitate that, let's get you to a place where, you know, we've got the kids' best interests best dealt with in agreement, whether that's parenting plan or whether that's consent orders or whether that's an FDR process as part of the court process. It is not confidential. It is reportable. But again, it comes back to that I can make non-binding recommendations as a parenting coordinator. So if I had to provide a court with evidence, it would be that in this meeting, these things were discussed about these issues with this particular order or these particular arrangements. The recommendations that I provided to the parents were A, B, and C. That hasn't happened.
So if you're asked by, let's say there's ongoing proceedings and the interim order was made for a parenting coordinator, and you're involved and you get to that point where you feel like you need to do a written report and outline to the court what your recommendations were, how does that get before the court? Do the parties file it, or?
Yes, so it's actually the parties that are responsible for. So parenting coordinate, and again, I think it's something that you've probably got further on in the slides that you've put together. But you'll see from that example order that a PC in Australia is appointed pursuant to Section 13C.
Yes.
So if there's non-compliance with Section 13C, then if I'm required under Section 13D to provide the court with a report, it's the non-defaulting parent who would file that. So I would provide, I would provide that report. I have, touch wood, not had to appear and actually give evidence
that was my next question, Claire. Have you had to be cross-examined on?
And to my knowledge, the written reports that I have had to provide parents with have not been used to relitigate matters, to my knowledge, to date. So all those things, touch wood.
Yes. And just in terms of going back to that 13C section of the Family Law Act, for those who don't know, their handout, the slides have dropped now in the comment section, so you can download that there and you can have a read of Section 13C, which essentially is the section of the legislation that gives the court the power or the jurisdiction to appoint a parenting coordinator. I've got a question I want to ask you, Claire, because I know you're a qualified independent children's lawyer, so no doubt you speak to children regularly with that hat on. Put your PC hat on. Do you speak to kids?
Can. Have not to date, but can. I'm trying to think of. So I know John Graham and Laurie Yasnick do have a child inclusive parenting coordination model that they have adapted, and I am open to that. The jurisdictional technicalities of doing that, though, someone like myself who gets to move around the country because I have a defence spouse is, as you know, working with children, things are state-based, whereas family law, save and except for Western Australia, who does their own thing, is a federal piece of legislation, so Australia-wide except for WA. To work as a PC nationally, there would probably need to be a national working with children's check adopted by the Australian government, and I think it would also be beneficial for ICLs to actually have that national working with children's check, because it's a a federal jurisdiction that ICLs are appointed under. That probably would lead me into an extremely side tangent things about the huge gap between federal and state-based children's issues, which is probably a talk outside of parenting.
It's probably another conversation series topic, I would say, in itself.
And why Australia is a signatory to the Convention of Protection of Children's Rights, but we don't have that adopted into our state-based legislation. But the best component has been shaped into our family law legislation. So there's lots of there's many topics there. We could probably chat about that stuff for ages. But
tell us a bit more about the practical side of things, because we do have lots of parents who will be watching this. Do you speak to teachers? Do you speak to therapists?
I can.
Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I can if I need to. So in circumstances, I think I gave the example before, if you've got a child who's neurodivergent and maybe there's problems with something specific at school, I would be able to reach out to the school and the psychologist that's dealing with the child and have a conversation with them about what's happening with the parents, and how best to assist them both to be on the same page for what that child needs. So as we know, neurodivergent kids process things differently. They have different developmental milestones, and sort of talking about developmental milestones and things like that. Parenting coordination is a very blended, unique role, in that, yes, you need to know the family law stuff, but you also need to know the child-focused, developmentally appropriate, all those sorts of things, because yes, other mediations, you're neutral as a mediator, you're facilitating parties to reach their own agreement. PCs are child-focused. So I draw heavily on my paediatric nursing background when I'm doing PC work. I will tell parents examples of things that have happened to kids that I've seen in hospital that shouldn't have happened. If I need to do some of that reality testing, it's not something that, I don't want to sound like I weaponize that as such, but helping people understand the effect of decisions that they make from that place of emotional hijack and how that's going to affect their child does help. And again, snap parents back from that place of I'm hijacked and I'm upset with the other parent to, oh my gosh, what effect is this having on my child? What effect is it having on my child's future? And
it might be that has never been put to a parent in that way, or they've never actually sat back to reflect on that. Would that be a fair sort of comment to make?
Look, I think so. There are very good, and I can see somebody in the chat is talking about parenting orders programs. There's great programs out there. There are. Parents can do lots of different programs and things like that. That doesn't necessarily mean that all that information sticks or can be brought to the surface when they're in that headspace of hijack. And, you know, they're very specific, those post-order courses. They're very brief, really. So they are excellent for an education tool, but it's that need for ongoing education. It's the need for education and support that is unique to that family and those children.
And so we've got family mediators here as well. What would you say to them in terms of they're working with families to try and come up with parenting arrangements or ultimately a parenting plan? When should a family dispute resolution practitioner or mediator, when should they turn their mind to whether a PC might be suitable for the families they're working with? Is it mainly the high conflict matters? What do you think about that, Claire?
Yes, it's mainly high conflict matters. However, if you've got parents who are having extreme difficulties communicating with each other for all sorts of reasons, parenting coordination is of assistance. So mediators, we sort of spoke about it earlier, have that intake process where they screen people, work out what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. It is probably at that intake process that a mediator would be able to formulate the view that parenting coordination may assist these parents. So it might be something that's flagged at intake, and it might be as they're actually doing mediation, whether that is shuttle or same room or whatever's happening.
Yes.
As that mediation unravels and issues are brought to the surface and the mediator is having to deal with and assist the parties reach the structure that they agree to work within, it may be that then is a good idea to suggest that, look, once you've agreed to this, you may need assistance in actually living with, working through this together as you co-parent. So the suggestion can be put in a mediation environment. It can be, so an ICL can suggest that PC would be appropriate for what's in the child's best interest when they're putting that position to the court. PCs can be appointed at an interim level or at a final orders level.
Yes.
Historically, again, in the other jurisdictions that are a more arbitration role, PCs are appointed at final orders layer. My own personal view is that a lot of good work can be done at interim level. So as you know, Shaya, as a lawyer, a lot of people can reach agreement and get out of court without ever needing to ever see a final hearing.
Absolutely. And most don't end up at that trial point, do they?
The 5% of matters filed that end up at final hearing. But if you've got a parenting coordinator that's appointed and working consistently on a regular basis with parents from an interim stage, those child-focused or child-inclusive, if appropriate, outcomes are taking place a lot earlier.
And the reality is that those high conflict families take up 80% of the court's time, you know. And matters that go to court, I mean, I've never had a client go to court say, gee, that was a pleasant experience. But the matters that go to court can be in the system for a couple of years. That's not uncommon at all. So why not consider a PC on an interim basis before you get to that 2-3 years down the track?
Yes, because sometimes the 2-3 years down the track, people have become so polarized that maybe, you know, the old Jack, what's his name, is this as good as it gets kind of thing.
And for those who want draft wording for a parenting plan or orders that has now dropped in the chat box. So if you're a lawyer or an FDRP, feel free to grab that little cheat sheet that's been put together by the Pacifica Congress working group and got the green light from the court. I've certainly saved them myself, Claire, so thank you very much.
It deals with how you appoint if you can't agree who you're appointing and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and that's actually, I wanted to ask you that. So when you specify, or when the court makes the order or in a parenting plan, do you have to specify, so for example, Clare Jobson, or is it parenting coordinator as agreed? What do you recommend there?
So it's again the same as if you're doing orders for the appointment of a report writer or a mediator. You can either have the option of agreeing on a person, so you'd need to ring up their office and make sure they're available to assist, or you can do the panel of, one parent suggests a panel of 3 and the other parent selects one of those 3 names.
And I've just put in the chat box the website for Parenting Coordination Australia, which you're part of, and also your website as well, Claire, for anyone who needs names of PCs. We've only got less than 5 minutes left. We've been chatting a lot. It's been really interesting. Thank you. I want to know, and I think all the parents particularly want to know, who pays for this and how much is it going to cost them?
Okay, so same deal as private mediation, private reports. It's a private paying fee. PCs across Australia are charging anywhere between $300 and $600 an hour, which is usually divided equally between parents, unless there is consent by one parent to pay more or all of, because their financial circumstances are better than the other parent. So it's the same as any private professional service.
Generally speaking, it's going to be a lot cheaper than using lawyers, though, isn't it? Particularly when the cost is shared.
Absolutely. So if you're, even if you were paying a PC, $600 an hour, and you're splitting that halfway, $300 each, that is cheaper than the thousands of dollars of litigation and telephone calls and back in court and court appearances and dragging each other through. Awful place to be. Awful place to be.
It is awful. So we had that pilot the AG's department was running, I think in WA, wasn't it, in 2018 for a few years?
So they had
Relationships Australia doing that?
Yes. So Relationships Australia, Western Australia did the 3-year pilot. I was actually lucky enough to sit next to one of the ladies that was involved in that pilot at one of the Pacifica Congress conferences, and she said it was they had exceptionally good results as part of their pilot. I don't know if there was actually any published findings per se, but what I do know from my conversation with her is that their submissions, of course, were made to the Commonwealth Attorney Generals, and they did not receive funding beyond that pilot, which is quite common in all community legal centres, family relationship centres. And we've seen it ourselves. There's been a history of really good pilots of good things happening, but there's just not the government funding to support that on an ongoing basis. PC is not currently a category that legal aid covers.
No.
But as you know, ICLs do a lot of work for a very little amount of...
I'm well aware, Claire. I'm well aware of that. Thank you.
Commonwealth and state funding is an issue that we're always going to have when it comes to access to those sorts of legal services. For now, PC is private paying only. That I perceive will change in the future. It's not something that's going to change straight away. I think it's with all things. It's a process.
I mean, if Relationships Australia was to have funding to do this at the the stage of a parenting plan or helping parents reach parenting plans, surely that would help to keep parents out of court and save the government money. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm going to look through the questions to make sure we have nothing unanswered. If you've got a question to anyone who's live, drop it in the comment box, because we'll wrap up. We're at the 1 hour mark. I'll ask you, Claire, what have I missed in this chat? Is there anything?
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
So
we've covered a lot.
We have covered a lot. You spoke a bit about what do people need, and I sort of said, you know, my one-liner from Liam Neeson about specific set of skills. I think if there's anybody listening today that is interested in training as a parenting coordinator, my personal view is that it would be of assistance to you doing the work to have the ICL training. So to be an ICL, you have to have practiced in family law for 5 years or more before you can even do that training. I think it's also beneficial for all humans working with humans every day to have mental health first aid training, trauma-informed practice training, and domestic violence training, all ongoing, because we're dealing with humans who are dealing with human issues. The other training that I think is also a good starting point before you do the PC training is Prof. Jen McIntosh has child-informed mediation training. Now, Jen developed the detection of overall risk screening tool many years ago, and that's been adapted by the courts in their Lighthouse screen. So all those things are of significant assistance to people who are considering being a PC before they do their PC training. And the other training that I had done prior to becoming a parenting coordinator was high conflict mediation training by Bill Eddy. So he's based in America, but he's got some very excellent resources if people are interested in that as well. There is a lot of information out and about parenting coordination, and there's a lot of misinformation about parenting coordination. So I guess I would encourage people to find the accurate sources of information, and if I can be of any assistance, sing out.
Thank you, Claire. And we put your details in the chat box, but also in the handout there's the link to your website with your contact details. And I'll just finish off here with this poll question. Now that you know more about the role of a PC, do you think it may be useful in your matter or for some clients that you work with? And keeping in mind that the very first question at the start of this chat was, what do you know about PCs? And 67% said nothing. So we now get on to, now that you know more, would it be helpful? So 33% say yes, 67% say possibly. No one said no. So that's quite interesting. There you go. So Claire, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everyone that joined us live. I would encourage anyone to reach out to Claire for any questions, and yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Claire.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.